In 2015, GPS reveals the last location before Mark's shocking disappearance. Narrated by investigative journalist Noah Miller, the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn that crisp October morning in 2015 when Sarah Henderson made the call that would change everything. Her voice trembled through the phone line to the Cedar Falls Police Department, each word carefully measured yet heavy with the weight of a mother's deepest fear. "My son Mark didn't come home last night," she whispered into the receiver. "He always calls. Always. Something's wrong." As an investigative journalist who spent the better part of 2 decades covering missing persons cases across the Midwest, I can tell you that those first 24 hours are crucial. They're the difference between a worried parent and a family forever changed. What made Mark Henderson's case different wasn't just the circumstances of his disappearance. It was what technology would eventually reveal about his final hours. Mark Henderson was 28 years old, a software engineer with a quiet demeanor and an infectious laugh that could light up any room. Those who knew him described a young man who was methodical in everything he did. He kept detailed calendars, responded to texts within minutes, and had never, not once in his adult life, failed to check in with his family when he was supposed to. That's what made October 15, 2015, so unusual. The perfect son. To understand why Mark's disappearance sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Cedar Falls, Iowa, you have to understand who Mark was. Born and raised in this college town of roughly 40,000 residents, Mark was what locals called good people. He'd graduated summa cum laude from the University of Northern Iowa with a degree in computer science, landed a solid job at a local tech startup, and still made time to help his elderly neighbors with their computer problems. His mother, Sarah, a retired elementary school teacher, spoke of her son with the kind of pride that only comes from raising someone who genuinely makes the world a little better. His father, Robert, a mechanic who'd worked at the same shop for 30 years, would beam whenever anyone mentioned Mark's latest project or achievement. Mark was reliable, Sarah told me during our first interview, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. If he said he'd be somewhere at 7, he was there at 6:55. If he said he'd call, the phone would ring. That's just who he was. The family's last normal conversation happened on October 14th, during their weekly Wednesday night dinner. Mark had seemed his usual self, discussing a new coding project at work, making plans to help his father winterize the garden shed that weekend, and mentioning that he might drive up to Waterloo on Thursday evening to check out a vintage bookstore he'd heard about online. He was excited about finding some old programming manuals, Robert recalled, his voice carrying that particular weight that comes with knowing you're describing the last normal moment you'll ever have with someone you love. Said he wanted to add them to his collection. The day everything changed. Thursday, October 15th began like any other day in the Henderson household. Mark left for work at his usual time, 7:30 a.m. sharp, wearing his favorite navy blue sweater and carrying the leather messenger bag his parents had given him for his birthday. He kissed his mother goodbye, as was his custom, and promised to text her when he got to the office safely. That text came at 7:52 a.m. "Made it, love you, Mom." It would be the last communication anyone would have with Mark Henderson. At Innovate Solutions, the small software company where Mark worked as a senior developer, colleagues noticed nothing unusual about his behavior. Jessica Torres, his project partner and close friend, remembered Mark being in good spirits during their morning stand-up meeting. He was working on a particularly challenging piece of code, Jessica told me, her eyes distant with memory. But Mark loved challenges. He thrived on solving problems that others found impossible. He seemed normal, happy even. Mark worked through lunch, which wasn't unusual for him when he was deep in a coding session. Around 3 p.m. he mentioned to his supervisor, Dave Kumar, that he might leave a little early to beat traffic if he decided to make that drive to Waterloo. I told him to go ahead, Dave remembered, guilt creeping into his voice even 8 years later. We had a good day. The project was coming along nicely. Mark seemed satisfied with his progress. I never thought, how could I have known it would be the last time I'd see him? Mark packed up his workstation at 4:15 p.m. Security cameras showed him leaving the building at 4:18 p.m., walking to his car, a well-maintained 2012 Honda Civic, with his characteristic purposeful stride. He waved to the security guard, Tom Mills, who would later tell police that Mark seemed perfectly normal, maybe even a little happier than usual. The investigation begins. When Sarah Henderson called the police that Friday morning, Detective Patricia Walsh was assigned to the case. A 20-year veteran of the Cedar Falls Police Department, Walsh had handled dozens of missing persons cases, and she knew that adults have the right to disappear if they choose to. But something about Sarah's calm certainty that something was wrong made her take the case seriously from the start. Most parents who call about missing adult children are either overly dramatic or trying to convince me their kid is in danger, Detective Walsh explained to me during our interview. Sarah was different. She was scared, yes, but she was also absolutely certain that Mark wouldn't just vanish without a word. Her certainty made me listen. The initial investigation followed standard protocol. Police contacted Mark's workplace, verified with friends and extended family that no one had heard from him, and put out a BOLO alert for his vehicle. They also reached out to hospitals in a 50-mile radius, checked local jails, and contacted his bank to see if there had been any recent activity on his accounts. The bank records revealed something interesting. Mark had used his debit card at a gas station in Cedar Falls at 4:45 p.m. on Thursday, just 27 minutes after leaving work. Security footage from the station showed him filling up his Honda and purchasing a bottle of water and a granola bar. He appeared relaxed, even smiled at something on his phone before getting back in his car. That was at 4:51 p.m. After that, Mark Henderson seemed to vanish into thin air. The search intensifies. By Saturday morning, the story had reached local media, and the community of Cedar Falls began to mobilize. Mark's photograph, a professional headshot showing his warm brown eyes and gentle smile, appeared on local news broadcasts and social media feeds. The description that accompanied it painted the picture of an average young man, 5'10", 165 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, last seen wearing a navy sweater and dark jeans. Volunteer search parties formed organically. Friends from college, co-workers, neighbors, and complete strangers who'd simply been moved by the story gathered at the Henderson family home. They divided into groups and began systematically searching parks, trails, and wooded areas around Cedar Falls and the surrounding countryside. Sarah Henderson became the face of the search effort, her composed determination inspiring others to join the cause. She appeared on local television, her voice steady despite the obvious strain. "Mark is a good person who brings joy to everyone he meets," she said during one particularly memorable interview. "He has people who love him and need him to come home. If anyone has seen him, if anyone knows anything, please don't hesitate to call." The family set up a Facebook page that quickly gained thousands of followers. Tips poured in from across Iowa and neighboring states. Each one was investigated thoroughly by Detective Walsh and her growing team, but none led to Mark. Then came the break they'd been hoping for, the GPS revelation. It was Detective Walsh's idea to check with Mark's cell phone carrier about GPS data. Modern smartphones, she knew, constantly ping cell towers and can provide detailed location information even when the phone itself is turned off or destroyed. Getting access to that data required a warrant, which took precious time. But on October 22nd, exactly 1 week after Mark's disappearance, the data arrived. What it revealed would fundamentally change the direction of the investigation. Mark's phone had indeed traveled north from the gas station, seemingly heading toward Waterloo as he'd mentioned to his co-workers. The GPS ping showed his phone moving along Highway 58 at normal traffic speeds. But instead of continuing to Waterloo, the phone had taken an unexpected detour. At 5:23 p.m. on October 15th, Mark's phone had turned onto a rural county road about 15 miles northeast of Cedar Falls. This wasn't along any logical route to Waterloo, nor was it near any businesses or attractions that would explain the deviation. The phone had traveled along increasingly rural roads for another 12 minutes before the GPS signal abruptly ended at 5:35 p.m. The final location was in the middle of nowhere, a gravel road surrounded by cornfields and isolated farmland. There were no businesses, no houses, no reason for Mark to be there. Detective Walsh felt her pulse quicken as she studied the GPS data. In her experience, when someone's phone signal ends suddenly in a remote location, it usually means one of three things. The phone's battery died, the phone was deliberately destroyed, or something had happened to the person carrying it. The discovery armed with the precise GPS coordinates, Detective Walsh organized a focused search of the area where Mark's phone signal had last been detected. It was a cold gray morning on October 23rd when the search team, consisting of police officers, K-9 units, and volunteers, converged on the remote gravel road. The location was as isolated as the GPS data had suggested. County Road 245 was little more than a narrow gravel track that served a handful of distant farmhouses. Cornfields stretched in every direction, broken only by occasional stands of trees and the odd farm building. The search team spread out in a systematic grid pattern, but it was one of the K-9 units that made the first significant discovery. At approximately 11:30 a.m., a German shepherd named Rex began barking frantically near a drainage ditch about 200 yards from the road. What they found there would answer some questions about Mark Henderson's disappearance while raising many others. Mark's Honda Civic sat partially hidden in the ditch, surrounded by tall grass and almost invisible from the road. The car appeared to have been driven there deliberately rather than having crashed. There were no skid marks, no signs of impact, and the vehicle was positioned as if someone had carefully maneuvered it into the hiding spot. Detective Walsh approached the vehicle with a mixture of hope and dread. The car doors were unlocked, the keys still in the ignition. Mark's messenger bag sat in the passenger seat, his wallet inside with all his credit cards and $73 in cash untouched. His cell phone lay on the floor of the back seat, its battery completely drained. But Mark himself was nowhere to be found. The scene investigation. The discovery of Mark's car transformed the case from a missing person investigation into something far more complex and troubling. Crime scene technicians spent hours processing the vehicle and the surrounding area, looking for any clue that might explain what had happened. The car told a strange story. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication that Mark had been forced from the vehicle against his will. In fact, the car's interior was neat and organized, exactly as those who knew Mark would have expected. His programming manuals, the ones he'd been excited about finding, sat carefully arranged in a small box in the trunk, suggesting he had indeed made it to the bookstore in Waterloo before whatever happened next. But there were puzzling details that didn't fit the narrative of a simple trip gone wrong. Mark's jacket was folded neatly on the back seat, despite the chilly October weather. His house keys were missing from his keychain, though his car keys remained. Most mysteriously, a handwritten note was found tucked under the driver's seat. The note, written in Mark's distinctive handwriting, simply read, "I'm sorry. This is the only way. Please take care of Mom and Dad." The suicide theory. The discovery of the note led investigators to consider the possibility that Mark had taken his own life. It would explain many of the puzzling aspects of the case: why he had driven to such a remote location, why his car was carefully hidden, why he had never contacted his family again. But those who knew Mark best rejected this theory immediately and completely. Mark wasn't suicidal. His friend Jessica Torres insisted during a follow-up interview with police. "I worked with him every day. We talked about everything, his projects, his family, his future plans. He was excited about life, about his career, about a trip he was planning to take with his parents next spring. People who are planning to kill themselves don't make plans for months in the future." Dr. Amanda Richardson, a forensic psychologist brought in to consult on the case, agreed that Mark's behavioral pattern didn't match typical suicide cases. Individuals who die by suicide often exhibit warning signs in the days and weeks beforehand, Dr. Richardson explained. Changes in behavior, mood, sleep patterns, appetite. They might give away possessions, say goodbye in subtle ways, or withdraw from relationships. Mark Henderson displayed none of these patterns. In fact, his behavior in the days before his disappearance suggested someone who was engaged with life and looking forward to the future. The note itself also raised questions. Handwriting analysis confirmed it was written by Mark, but linguistic experts noted that the phrasing was uncharacteristic of his usual communication style. Mark typically wrote in complete, well-structured sentences. This note was fragmented and vague, not at all like the precise, thoughtful way he usually expressed himself. New theories emerge. As the suicide theory crumbled under scrutiny, investigators began exploring other possibilities. The remote location where Mark's car was found became a crucial piece of the puzzle. Why would Mark, who was methodical and logical in everything he did, drive to this particular spot? Detective Walsh began researching the area's history and discovered something interesting. The land where Mark's car was found had been the subject of a property dispute between two farming families for several decades. While the legal issues had been resolved years earlier, local residents recalled that the area had a reputation for being a place where people went when they wanted to be alone, or when they needed to think. "It wasn't widely known," explained Harold Morrison, a local farmer who'd lived in the area his entire life. "But young people sometimes knew about it. If you wanted to get away from everything, clear your head, that's where you might go. It was isolated but safe, if you know what I mean. This revelation suggested that Mark might have driven to the location intentionally, perhaps to think through some problem or decision. But what problem? And what decision? Those who knew him insisted he had no major troubles in his life. The investigation team began looking deeper into Mark's recent activities, combing through his computer files, his internet search history, his social media activity, and his phone records. What they found painted the picture of a man living a normal, stable life with no indication of distress or conflict. The community's response. As weeks turned into months without answers, the Cedar Falls community rallied around the Henderson family in remarkable ways. Local businesses donated services for search efforts. Churches organized prayer vigils. The University of Northern Iowa's Computer Science Department established a scholarship in Mark's name. Sarah Henderson became an advocate for missing persons cases, working with other families who were facing similar situations. She appeared at conferences and workshops, sharing her story and pushing for improvements in how these cases are investigated and handled. Mark's case taught me that anyone can disappear, she told a gathering of law enforcement officials 6 months after her son vanished. It doesn't matter how stable they seem, how predictable their routine is, or how much they're loved. Sometimes people just vanish and we need to be better prepared to find them. The family never gave up hope, but as time passed, that hope became tempered with acceptance of a difficult reality. Mark might never come home, and they might never know what happened to him. The cold case years. By 2017, Mark Henderson's case had officially been designated as cold. Detective Walsh had retired, passing the file to Detective Michael Santos, who reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes, but found no new leads to pursue. The case remained open, as all missing persons cases do, but active investigation had largely ceased. The Henderson family continued their efforts to keep Mark's story in the public eye. They maintained the Facebook page, updated with periodic posts asking for anyone with information to come forward. They marked significant dates: Mark's birthday, the anniversary of his disappearance, holidays he would have spent with family, with heartfelt messages that always ended with the same plea: if you know something, please call. Local media revisited the story annually, usually around the anniversary of Mark's disappearance. Each retelling brought a few new tips, but none led anywhere meaningful. The case had become one of those mysteries that haunt small communities, a reminder that sometimes bad things happen to good people for reasons no one can understand or explain. Technological advances and new hope. In 2019, advances in cell phone data analysis offered new possibilities for cold cases like Mark's. The Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation announced that they were using new software to reanalyze GPS data from older cases, looking for patterns or connections that might have been missed during initial investigations. Mark's case was selected for this enhanced analysis, and the results provided some intriguing new information. The software was able to identify other devices that had been in the area around the time Mark's phone signal ended. While most of these could be explained by legitimate reasons, farmers working in nearby fields, other travelers passing through, one stood out as potentially significant. An unknown device had been in the immediate vicinity of where Mark's car was found for approximately 20 minutes, overlapping with the time Mark's phone went dead. This device had then traveled south, back towards Cedar Falls, before its signal was lost near the interstate highway. This discovery suggested that Mark might not have been alone during his final recorded moments, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who was the other person? Were they involved in Mark's disappearance? Or were they simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? And most importantly, could they provide answers about what happened to Mark? The investigation reopens. The new GPS evidence was enough to convince current investigators to take another serious look at Mark's case. Detective Santos assembled a small task force including FBI analysts, specializing in digital forensics and behavioral analysis. They began working through the case systematically, re-interviewing witnesses, re-examining physical evidence, and exploring new theories based on the technological revelations. One theory that gained traction was that Mark might have arranged to meet someone at the remote location. Perhaps he had been contacted by someone who needed help. Mark was known for his willingness to assist others with technical problems. Or perhaps he had arranged to meet someone in connection with his interest in vintage books and programming materials. Investigators began looking at Mark's recent online activity with new focus. examining forums he participated in, websites he visited, and any online transactions he might have made. They discovered that Mark had been active on several collector forums related to vintage computing and programming materials, and had recently arranged to purchase some rare manuals from a private seller. The seller turned out to be a legitimate collector from Minneapolis with no connection to Mark's disappearance, but the discovery highlighted how much of Mark's life had involved online interactions with people his family and friends knew nothing about. A break in the case. In February 2021, nearly 6 years after Mark's disappearance, the case took an unexpected turn. A construction crew working on a road improvement project about 5 miles from where Mark's car had been found made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. While excavating for a new culvert, workers uncovered human remains in what appeared to be a shallow, improvised grave. The location was in a wooded area just off County Road 187, another remote gravel road similar to where Mark's car had been found. The remains were badly decomposed, but preliminary examination suggested they belonged to a male of approximately Mark's age and build. Dental records would be needed for positive identification, but Detective Santos felt cautiously optimistic that they had finally found Mark Henderson. The discovery raised new questions about the case. If these were Mark's remains, how had he ended up buried 5 miles from his car? Had he walked there under his own power, or had someone transported him? And most crucially, had Mark died by suicide, accident, or was foul play involved? The identification process. Forensic examination of the remains was painstakingly slow. Years of exposure to the elements and natural decomposition had taken their toll, making the identification process complex and time-consuming. The Henderson family waited anxiously for results, torn between hoping the remains were Mark's, which would at least provide closure, and hoping they weren't, which would mean Mark might still be alive somewhere. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic anthropologist assigned to the case, worked methodically through the available evidence. Height and build were consistent with Mark's description. The estimated age at time of death matched Mark's age when he disappeared, but it was dental records that would provide the definitive answer. Mark's dentist, Dr. Patricia Williams, had maintained detailed records of his dental work, including several distinctive fillings and a crown he'd received following a childhood accident. When these records were compared to the remains, the match was unmistakable. On March 15, 2021, Detective Santos made the call that Sarah and Robert Henderson had been both hoping for and dreading for more than 5 years. Mark was finally coming home. The final questions. While the discovery of Mark's remains provided the Henderson family with the closure they desperately needed, it also raised new questions about the circumstances of his death. The forensic examination revealed no obvious signs of trauma that would indicate foul play, but the condition of the remains made it impossible to rule out definitively. The location where Mark's body was found was significant. It was accessible by foot from where his car had been discovered, but the route would have taken him through challenging terrain, including dense woods and a small creek. Why would Mark have made this difficult journey, especially in the growing darkness of an October evening? Dr. Chen's analysis suggested that Mark had been deceased for several years, consistent with the timeline of his disappearance, but the exact cause of death remained undetermined due to the condition of the remains. The investigation team developed several theories about Mark's final hours. Perhaps he had driven to the remote location to meet someone, and something had gone wrong. Perhaps he had become disoriented or injured while exploring the area on foot. Or perhaps the suicide note found in his car had been genuine, and Mark had walked into the woods with the intention of ending his life. The psychological profile. Dr. Richardson, the forensic psychologist who had consulted on the case years earlier, was asked to revisit her analysis in light of the new evidence. She spent weeks reviewing all available information about Mark's final days, his psychological state, and the circumstances of his disappearance and death. Her conclusion was nuanced and troubling. While Mark's behavior before his disappearance showed no obvious signs of suicidal ideation, Dr. Richardson noted that some individuals are remarkably skilled at hiding their internal struggles. The methodical way Mark had approached his final day, completing work projects, maintaining normal interactions with colleagues and family, was consistent with someone who had made a decision and was following through with careful planning. The note found in Mark's car, while uncharacteristic of his usual communication style, might have reflected the emotional state of someone in crisis who was struggling to articulate their feelings. The vague wording and fragmentary structure, could indicate someone who was overwhelmed and unable to express complex emotions clearly. However, Dr. Richardson emphasized that this was only one possible explanation. The evidence could also support theories involving accidental death or even foul play that was carefully concealed. The family's acceptance. For Sarah and Robert Henderson, having Mark's remains returned to them was both a relief and a new source of grief. The not knowing had been torturous, but confirmation of their son's death brought its own devastating reality. Part of us always hoped he was out there somewhere, maybe with amnesia or living under another name, Sarah explained during our final interview. As long as we didn't know for certain, we could imagine he might walk through the door someday. Now we know that won't happen. The family held a memorial service for Mark in April 2021, more than 5 years after his disappearance. The turnout was remarkable. Hundreds of people who had been touched by Mark's story over the years, many of whom had never met him personally. The service celebrated Mark's life while acknowledging the mystery that surrounded his death. Robert Henderson's eulogy was particularly moving. He spoke of a son who had brought joy and pride to his family, who had made the world a little bit better through his kindness and intelligence, and who had touched far more lives than he probably ever realized. "We may never understand what happened in Mark's final hours," Robert said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "But we know who Mark was. He was our son, and he was loved. That's what matters now." The lasting impact. Mark Henderson's case has become a reference point for missing persons investigations in Iowa and beyond. The combination of modern technology and traditional investigative techniques demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of contemporary law enforcement. The case highlighted the importance of GPS data in missing persons investigations, while also showing that technology alone cannot always provide answers. Mark's disappearance and death remain partially unexplained, despite extensive investigation and the application of advanced forensic techniques. Detective Santos, who saw the case through from cold case to resolution, believes Mark's story offers important lessons for both law enforcement and families dealing with missing persons cases. "Every case is unique, but Mark's case taught us the importance of never giving up," Santos reflected. Technology kept improving. New techniques became available, and eventually we were able to give his family the answers they needed. It wasn't the ending anyone wanted, but it was closure. A life remembered. Today, Mark Henderson's memory lives on in multiple ways. The scholarship established in his name has helped dozens of computer science students pursue their education. His family's advocacy work has contributed to improvements in missing persons protocols and support systems for affected families. The vintage programming manuals Mark had purchased on his final day were eventually donated to the University of Northern Iowa's Computer Science Department, where they serve as part of a historical collection. It seemed like something Mark would have wanted, his final purchase being used to educate and inspire future programmers. Sarah Henderson continues to update Mark's Facebook page occasionally, sharing memories and marking important dates. The posts are less frequent now, but they serve as a reminder that Mark was more than just a missing persons case or a mystery to be solved. He was a beloved son, a loyal friend, a dedicated professional, and a kind person who made a difference in the lives of those around him. The mystery of what exactly happened to Mark Henderson in those final hours may never be fully solved. The investigation officially closed with his death classified as undetermined, neither suicide nor homicide definitively proven. But perhaps the specific circumstances matter less than the broader story of a life well lived and a family's enduring love. Mark Henderson disappeared on October 15, 2015, when he was 28 years old. In the years since, his story has reminded us all of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing the people we love. His final location, revealed by GPS technology, brought his family the closure they needed to begin healing, even as it left some questions forever unanswered. In a world where technology seems to document our every movement, Mark's case serves as a sobering reminder that some mysteries persist despite our best efforts to solve them. But it also demonstrates the power of love, community, and determination in the face of the unthinkable. Mark Henderson may be gone, but he is not forgotten. His story continues to inspire others to never give up hope, to appreciate the ordinary moments that make up a life, and to remember that every person who goes missing is someone's beloved child, friend, or family member. The GPS may have revealed Mark's final location, but his true legacy lies in the hearts of those who knew him and in the positive changes his story has brought to how we search for, and remember, the missing. This investigation was conducted with the full cooperation of the Henderson family and the Cedar Falls Police Department. Names of some individuals have been changed to protect privacy. If you have information about this or any missing persons case, please contact your local law enforcement agency. About the narrator. Noah Miller is an investigative journalist specializing in missing persons and cold cases. He has covered criminal justice issues for over 20 years and has contributed to the resolution of several high-profile cases through his reporting. He continues to advocate for improved protocols in missing persons investigations and support for affected families.